Hello again, YouTubers. Today we're going to be looking at fitting a new coil to the Villiers two-stroke engine. Right, as anybody who's ever played with Villiers engines will know, they have got a reputation for ignition problems, specifically duff coils. You can see the coil just in there behind the flywheel. Now, the way to confirm that the coil is the source of your problems, you will need a multimeter. Doesn't need to be anything special, this is just an old analogue one, and if you set it onto the ohms, onto the 1000 ohm range, which may well be marked as 1k, as in 1000, I'll just show you how you test the coil. Now, generally speaking, it's the secondary winding that plays up on these coils, and in fact any coil. It's in fact made up of many thousands of turns of very fine wire, and it doesn't take a lot time, moisture for one little break in one of those little winds and effectively render the coil useless. That effectively is what has happened to mine. It was producing a spark, but when tested it was showing as open circuit on the secondary. What can happen is a spark can actually jump internally, but each time it does that, the little gap gets wider and wider as it burns back until you get to a point where the spark can no longer jump, and then you lose all ignition, which is what's happened to this engine, unfortunately. Right, as an initial test, all you need to do is, when your meter's set on kilo ohms, put one of your meter leads on an earth, which is anywhere basically bare metal on the engine, and the other on the HT terminal of the spark plug. That will give you an initial idea, and as you can see, well, you probably can't, my hand's in the way. How can I do this so you can see? Right, as you can see, there is absolutely no reading there. That's showing open circuit. The next thing to do, just to rule out the possibility of a break in the HT lead, is if you can remove the HT lead and get access to the actual tag on the coil itself. And the way to do that, just undo the terminal there, and on these Villiers they've actually got just adjust that, a screw-in fitting on here. Be careful with this little Bakelite fitting because it does break very easily, and they're not cheap to replace. In fact, this one had been cracked, and I repaired it with super glue. So far it's holding up. Right, screw that out, and there is this little spring-loaded contact which contacts the terminal, which is actually on the coil itself. And what I'm going to do now, just to confirm we have got a problem with the coil, I'm going to go back in with my meter, back in onto there's a little copper pad on the coil, again earth in there, and I have got open circuit, so I do know that this coil is duff. Well, anyone that's tried to source a coil for any old engine will know that generally speaking they're not cheap. You can be looking anywhere from £50 to £100 even, or even more than that if it needs to be a custom rewind. Now, to demonstrate just how commonplace Villiers coil failures must be, they're actually now reproducing them in Taiwan. If you can see on the box there, this one just turned up in the post today, bought really quite cheaply on eBay. Whether they're any good or not remains to be seen. Now, the one I need for this engine, there are various different size coils fitted to the Villiers engines. The specific size fitted to this engine isn't available as a cheap Taiwanese copy. However, this one, which is described as the long style, you see it there, while it's not as long as the one currently fitted, the original Villiers coil, I'm hoping that the core, well, I know I've measured it, it is long enough to fit within the cast iron ears there. So hopefully we should be able to get this one rigged up to work. And the fittings are all slightly different. There's no pad on the top, and the primary, there's a little screw in there which isn't going to come out. So what I'm going to have to do is probably solder a little tag on there, and I'm probably going to make up a little copper pad and solder it onto this lead here on the secondary. We shall see how we go. I've talked about testing for open circuit, but of course I haven't told you what a good reading is. What you really want to see on the secondary is somewhere around about 5,000 kiloohms. Perhaps 3.5 to 5,000, something around that region is good. And we'll just test this new one here. So there's the secondary, and on these they are earthed through the core, and we're getting a reading of bang on 5,000 ohms there. So far so good. Right, to access the coil on these, in order to remove and replace, it's actually quite an involved little procedure. It's not just a case of removing the flywheel. What you'll probably have to find you have to do, is remove the engine completely from its frame, whether that be in the mower or wherever. The reason for that, the coil core is located within sockets. I don't know if you can see that, I'm in the light. Sockets within those cast iron ears, which are at the top and bottom of that image there. So to remove the coil, you need to remove at least one of those cast iron ears. Now they are held in place by two screws which are fitted through the back plate, and to access the head of those, the engine's got to be completely removed from this framework. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to solder up the tabs on that coil, show what that looks like, and then set about removing the engine. Okay, well, I've just had the soldering iron out, and what I've done is very, very carefully soldered on a little copper pad there, little compact contact pad, and a fly lead on the primary, and that little screw that was connected to the primary coil. Being very careful at all times to avoid too much heat going into the coil. Just slipped a little bit of cardboard under there just to protect it. So hopefully that's going to do. Next step is remove the old coil. Right, well, that's the engine removed from the frame, and I've pulled the flywheel off, and now you can see more clearly the arrangement of the coil on the back plate, your points, etc. Now, what I said earlier about simply removing the screws on the back of these ears, on one of these ears, pulling it away and pull the coil out, that's not in fact true. I remember now, on the back of these there's a little grub screw which locks the coil core into the two sockets. So what has to happen, the whole coil's got to come off with its ears. Unfortunately, to do that, you obviously need to access the two screws on the back of this ear. To do that, you've either got to remove the barrel or remove the back plate. Now I'm going to remove the back plate. Now, the first time I removed this, these two screws here which hold it on are very, very tight indeed. So be aware of that. Like I say, this isn't a 2-minute procedure to change the coil on these. Obviously there's the wire from the primary to the point, so I'll just snip that off there and join that onto my fly lead, and I solder it onto the new coil. What I'm going to do now, snip that and remove the back plate. Okay, well, that's the back plate removed, and if I just turn it over, you'll be able to see these are the 4 screws holding the ears on. So I'm now going to undo these, which, by the way, these were very tight also the first time I removed it, remove those and remove the coil complete with both of its ears. Okay, so I've removed the 4 screws on the back of the coil ears, and there are the 2 grub screws I was talking about that actually hold the core in place. And I'm just going to show you how the new coil compares. And I mentioned before, it's actually not an exact match. Right, if you can see, a bit difficult, the actual coil itself is what, 12.5 inch shorter than the original, but fortunately the core, which is the correct diameter, I ensured that before I ordered it, should still locate into the ears. Whether or not they'll lock on the grub screws, we'll have to see, but that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, well that's how the new coil is going to fit, how it's going to sit in those ears. Not screwed it down yet. There's about 5mm of each end of the core in the ears, so hopefully that'll be okay. I shall just line it up so that the my contact patch is in line with the terminal, the HT terminal that comes through that hole there. Bolt it up and solder up the primary to the points, probably put a bit of heat sleeve on that, and put it all back together. Okay, so there's the coil all fitted up into place on the back plate, all mounted up. The connections are all made. What I had to do in the end regarding the grub screws, I had to position the coil slightly this way so it does lock on that one screw. The only real reason for those is to prevent it from turning, so you maintain alignment for the tab there. So it's locked on nicely on that one. This end, it's just catching the end. I'm not really doing anything, but that should be fine. So I'm now going to put it all back together and see if we've got a spark. Right, before going for full reassembly, I thought I'd just show you the significance of that contact patch that I soldered on earlier, and of getting the alignment correct. As you can see there, if it'll focus, I've got it just central there, so that sprung contact just touches it centrally. And as a final test, I've got the multimeter again. I've got it onto the HT lead, and if I just touch that onto an earth, put that the right way up, there we are, 5,000 ohms. So far so good. Okay, well that's it all back together. I did briefly spin it over by hand with the plug out, and it did certainly look to be sparking quite nicely. But I think it's time to take it outside and try it. Fingers crossed.